Hello, welcome back to another episode on Harmony Inspired Health. Today we have a very special guest joining us, Susan Joyce Proctor, a visionary entrepreneur, Ayurvedic practitioner, and expert in women's wellness, blood type science, and Ayurvedic astrology. With over 30 years of experience in the wellness revolution, Susan has a unique approach to supporting women on their journey to optimal health and self-expression. She's the founder of Divina Rising, a platform dedicated to empowering women through both wellness and business. In today's episode, we'll be exploring the fascinating relationship between Ayurveda, women's wellness, and blood type science. We'll also delve into how these approaches can help refine Ayurvedic dosha balancing and optimize women's health, particularly during menopause. Welcome to the podcast, Susan.
Oh, thank you so much, Harmony. I'm so glad we were able to get this together.
I know you were saying this before we hit record. Susan's in the area where the hurricanes are going on in Florida, and so there's
Yes.
been a few like mishaps with power and all the stresses you have before you actually have to come onto somebody's podcast. So thank you for being
Exactly.
here.
The that's here, and it's so much fun.
It is, and we get to discuss things that we absolutely love.
I
So
know, Harmony, one of the things for me, you may find this too, there aren't too many people that I know that speak Ayurveda. And
yeah,
I miss doing that. It's so yummy to connect with other Ayurvedic people because
yeah.
there's a perspective on life that we share that not everybody has the benefit of yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it is definitely spreading far and wide, which is beautiful and amazing because, like I always say, it's a time-tested science. It's been around for 5,000 plus years. I actually have an Ayurveda school, so I'm fortunate enough to be able to communicate with a lot of people who are into studying Ayurveda. So love chatting about it. Yeah, so thank you so much for being here. I'm so curious to learn more about the blood type science and how you integrate that with Ayurveda. That's one of the things I do love about Ayurveda is we can integrate it with so many different modern medicines. And for me, with a background in Western medicine and science, I actually love integrating functional medicine, pathology, all of that with Ayurveda. So I can't wait to dive into this. But to get us started, you've had like quite a journey from the corporate world, right, to becoming a pioneer in women's wellness through Ayurveda. So, can you share with us how you discovered Ayurveda and what inspired you to make this your life's work?
I will, and of course, I'm going to give you the short version of the story because we only have about a half hour today. Um, I'll say it this way: for most of my life, I was so vata deranged that I didn't know that I didn't have that as a distinction. I was just a very intelligent, focused person that sometimes got very ungrounded and couldn't eat and sleep and got weird. And one of those times back in 1992 in New York City, where I lived, um, that happened. And I ended up in a part of town that I wasn't planning to be in. And I passed a metaphysical bookstore and
Oh,
something literally dragged me into the store. And then literally a book about Ayurveda fell on my head. I mean, you
wow.
can't get more dramatic than that. And I remember I looked at the flyleaf and it described the three doshas, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. And I read the Vata and it was, how did they know this about me? And then, so I bought the book, of course. And then because I think it was just, a soul
Mm,
thing that was going to happen, one thing led to another, and I heard about a course that was taking place and I was going to be there that day, and I fell in love. I'm sure you understand that. So
mm,
I had the opportunity back in 1992 to
wow.
attend my first certification program at a time before quantum science was at all part of the thinking in the Western world. And I remember at the time thinking, I know this is true,
Mm,
but my Western mind doesn't know how to grasp this. And I am someday going to need to teach people how to speak Ayurveda. I'm going to figure this out. So it has been a journey and a longer one than we can go into too much today. But that was my first exposure, and it
yeah.
really did happen just like that.
I love that story so much. They do say that Ayurveda calls you, or in this instance, whacks you in the head. But either way, it
Literally.
really presents itself to you, and it's like coming home, a remembering. So I felt the same. Like, oh my God, I already like feel like I know this, but there's so much more to learn about it. But it just made sense in all of my cells, and that's why I feel so fortunate to be able to teach others about it now and do things like this on the podcast and chat with you who's been practicing Ayurveda since 1992, which is a lot longer than I have. So I love
I
that.
didn't know anyone who had ever heard of it back then.
Yeah.
I was even more weird then, perhaps, than I am now. We've gotten
Taking
more
that
mainstream.
You got more mainstream through Ayurveda. I love that. Now, you do, well, blood type science is fairly mainstream, I guess. So you've integrated the blood type science into your Ayurvedic practice. But for listeners who aren't familiar, could you explain what blood type science is and how it relates to our personal health?
Absolutely. And again, short version, long story. There's a doctor, a naturopathic physician in the United States, who's really pioneered this research. And his name is Dr. Peter Diadamo.
Mhm.
And again, I found his book. And in a different way from Ayurveda, it also resonated with me deeply. And I undertook to study it. And I was actually part of the first group of practitioners and physicians that he certified back in 2002. And the only Ayurvedic person who was also certified in blood type science. I don't know if I still am, but at least at that time, I was the only person that I knew of that was certified in both. And the thing about blood type and the way I think about it, Harmony, is I think of humans as like prisms with many facets,
Mm.
where each of these expressions of us is a different facet. To me, the Ayurveda and the doshas are so profound. To me, this is a spiritual science. And Dr. Vasant Lab, who's one of my mentors, describes it as the descent of consciousness into matter. We can appreciate our physical beings as expressions of our soul aspects, and that's just a beautiful thing. And then in this physical world, we have other dimensions. And to me, the blood type is really a physical dimension, and it's a different one from Ayurveda. And I will confess, as much as I love Ayurveda, and I really do, it's one facet, and I don't think it suffices for everything. And in my experience of practicing it and on myself, as well as working with clients, I came to understand that doshic balance was not it's not the only goal for well-being. There are other aspects. And I remember in the early days, meeting with a client who was a Vata person, a Vata constitution, and very, you know, confidently recommending wheat and dairy because according to Ayurveda, those are Vata balancing foods. And they are, as we know, but that's not the only dimension of well-being. And later when I learned about blood type and looked back on that client example, that person had an O blood type, and those two foods were really not appropriate for that person.
Mm. And I think more to your point as well, like my Ayurvedic teacher, he said that in the Vedas, the last couple of pages were left blank. And the theory of that is that like Ayurveda is a life science, and we know life is always evolving. And as a human being, or the ones that are, being able to share this information, we evolve as well, and science evolves.
Mhm.
And they
Yes.
knew that. They knew that there was going to be this evolution. And so the blank pages represent the ability to bring in and understand emerging science as it comes, and understanding as we evolve as the human race and as we evolve as practitioners. And so I love that. And I think that you know, that's what was taught to me, and I've really taken on that philosophy because I truly believe it, and I'm the same as you. I integrate a lot of different medicines to find the right one for the right person, and as we know more, we get to share more. And again, our wheat and dairy was so different to what the wheat and dairy was, you know, 5,000, 2,000, even like a couple of hundred years ago. So it is a different science, as in we need to be updated
Yes.
with the best evidence-based practice in our modern times, because the dairy and the wheat, completely different. Like, I'm sure that person could probably have digested it very easy all the way back then, maybe not now at all. So yeah, I love that.
So that was some of what opened my eyes, and what what I came to understand um, about the blood type science is that basically each of the four blood types is practically a different species from each other.
Mm-hmm.
And like doshas, we all have a different digestive capacity, different immune strength, different strengths and weaknesses. And one of the aspects of the blood type science that I actually found to be the most valuable for well being in terms of a dramatic result in people, myself included, is the concept of lectins, lectins. It's perhaps a term you're familiar with, many
Yeah.
people are known that. But these are proteins that are create inflammation in the body and stuff like that, and they mimic insulin and do all kinds of nasty stuff. And they're blood type specific. So
Mm.
what I take a lot of things with a grain of salt, and I frankly don't agree with Dr. Diadamo about everything. I think he's more strict than is necessary, and somewhat rigid perhaps. But what I've seen with people when they stop eating those problem foods, there's sometimes a dramatic change in well-being. And I'll use myself as an example. I'm a fairly rare blood type. I'm a B, and
Mhm.
Bs are only about 10% of the population. Um, Many in India, though. Interesting. So in Ayurveda, there are many people of the B blood type that might have been exposed to it. But for my blood type, the worst food in the world is chicken. And that's a very, very, very common food in my world. And for my particular blood type, almost all the foods that were problematic are things that are considered healthy:
Mm.
tomatoes, chickpeas, sesame seeds. So it was a little hard to get through my head. And I felt I had to try this out on myself. So I eliminated all of those foods. And the results were so dramatic that I've really never been able to eat most of them again. I haven't eaten chicken in almost 25 years. And
Interesting.
I feel that for me, that was so dramatic that I tend to rely on a lot of the blood type recommendations for food because they are that dramatic. But what I found, just to knit this all together, because I know that's what you're the most interested in, is, to me, the optimal experience that I've had and that I've been able to share with people is to choose the right foods for our blood type and avoid the foods that have lectins for our blood type, and then eat those foods according to Ayurvedic principles.
Mm. Yeah,
And
amazing.
that one of the things that has been so exciting, in fact, I had a client in Australia that I was such a dramatic experience. One of the things I noticed is that the blood types and the doshas correspond to each other
Mhm.
very significantly. And specifically, the qualities of vata and the qualities of the A blood type are very similar. So if somebody reads a book about Ayurveda, and they are a vata with an A blood type, they're going to read that and go, yeah, that describes me pretty well. And then they can go read a book about the blood types and read the A and go, oh yeah, that describes me pretty well.
Interesting.
And similarly, Pitta and O are very similar. So
Yeah.
again, a Pitta person could read that and they would say, yes, that's me. But many, many people are not that. And what I've observed is that the qualities of each of the doshas and each of the blood types can either overlap and reinforce each other, or they can balance each other if they're different.
Mm.
And I have put together an entire system harmony. I call it the hemodoshic system
Ah, I love that.
because there are 3 doshas and 4 blood types. And so I have 12 archetypes in my system. And that example that I just offered of the Vata A, I call that person, excuse me, an orchid because they are very delicate. They both have weak digestion and a very high strung nervous system. You know that. You know about Vata. The A will reinforce that and it will reinforce some of the weaknesses and the health risks of that type. And that's very clear to me. Similarly with Pitta and O. But the example that I was just going to use that I think you'll enjoy hearing about was I've had many, but a particular client in Australia who was a Vata constitution and an O blood type. They're really different because Vata is somewhat delicate and O is very strong. Vata is high strung. The name that I give to that archetype is the racehorse because they're very strong, but they're high strung. And this particular lady was familiar with the blood type science. So she was eating the right foods of a lot of protein and not a lot of grains and stuff like that. But she was eating them in a way that were too dry and cold and light.
Mm.
And she wasn't very balanced and she didn't understand because she was eating the right foods, why that didn't work for her. And so I introduced, those balancing qualities, so if you eat, cooked rice instead of rice cakes, that will make all the difference for you. And it made all the difference for her. And her comment was, and this is an Australian expression that we don't have here. So to me, it was just so charming. She said, yeah, before it never touched the sides.
Amazing. I'm loving this. This is so interesting to me. And I'm just loving how it's marrying up with Ayurveda so well. Can you just explain to us what the key differences are between the various blood types in terms
Absolutely.
of how they influence our health and well-being? And like you've been mentioning different foods for the different blood types.
Absolutely. And gosh, this is a lot of information for the audience. So uh, we're doing good.
Well,
Uh,
I'm selfishly going,
this,
I'm loving this. I want to learn more.
I had a feeling it would be like this. That's why I was really hoping we would get it together, and I'm glad we did. Okay, so the way I was introduced to this, the original blood type of humans on the planet was O, and they were the hunter gatherers, and they had a physiology and a digestive system that was a good fit for their food supply, which was meat and fish and nuts and berries. There was no carbs around, there was no dairy. And in some ways, O's have not really evolved to metabolize those foods very well. They still do very well with protein.
Is
That's what
that
the
O
racehorse.
negative and O positive?
Yes, the positive and negative have to do a lot with pregnancy. And something else that I learned from an Ayurvedic perspective from Dr. Ladd, but I'm going to save that for a few minutes. But for nutrition, no difference between positive and negative. But O's are the hunter gatherers, and they're strong, and they have a fight or flight thing, and that's who they are. Then, as the story goes that I learned, over time, humans, migrated all over the planet following the large game. It eventually was being killed off, and agriculture started. And around the time that agriculture started and humans started living in more settled conditions with each other, there was a mutation to the A blood type. And A people can metabolize grains and vegetables much better, and they have an immune system that's much less aggressive. So it was easier for them to live with each other and not infect each other and all that kind of stuff, basically. And so, and they are still the 2 dominant blood types in the world. O's are 45% of the population globally, and A's are 40. So most of the time we're talking about those 2. Apparently B came along as another mutation, somewhat longer, and that mutation occurred, they believe, in the Himalayas or in the steppes near India under such harsh conditions that a lot of the weaknesses were kind of bred out early on. And that was around the time that animals were being domesticated. And as a bee, I can tell you, I am very happy that my blood type is really the first one that does well with dairy foods, because I really like them a lot. And that's part of what I was mentioning earlier. In India, where dairy is much more appreciated than in the West, it's also the case that there's a very high proportion of B blood type in India. In fact, it's the India and Pakistan, the only countries in the world where B is the highest proportion of blood type
Wow.
in the country.
Mm.
Um, and then AB was not a mutation. It came along later as an intermarriage of A and B, because O is a recessive, A and B are dominant, and they didn't cancel each other out. They just made a new blood type that is basically a combination of A and B. And Bs are about 10% of the population, and AB is only 5. So that's my little blood type course in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love that. So amazing. So if people don't know their blood type, what do you tell them? Like how can they find out their blood type?
Um, there's a couple of ways that people can find out. Sometimes their doctor will know, but most of the time not, because in the West, it's not considered that important. So they may not know. It often when people donate blood, like to the Red Cross, they'll be typed on the spot if they're willing to do that. Dr. Diadamo sells a kit, and I think he sells these to Australia. They're only about $10 here, that you can just prick your finger at home. It's $10 kit. You know, it takes a few minutes, and you can find out that way. That's or you know, if somebody's going in for a battery of blood tests, they can specifically request that, because apparently, unless you do that, you know, that isn't even taken when other blood tests are done.
Yeah, interesting. And when it comes to women's wellness, particularly around menopause, how does this combination of Ayurveda and the blood type science help with navigating this transition more effectively?
Well, okay. Oh gosh, I wish we had hours or days, but I'll say this. Um, Women who have a pitta constitution, as you know, um, are pitta rules the endocrine system.
Mm,
So pitta women have a lot going on with hormones. And when menopause occurs, um, women with the A blood type are more delicate and
mm,
have more vata issues. One of the things I'm thinking about this, because I'm hesitating, because I'm going to offer another distinction that I think is going to blow your mind with respect to menopause. The doshas correspond almost exactly to the sex hormones of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone.
mm,
The symptoms of vata excess and estrogen deficiency are almost identical. Pitta excess and testosterone excess are basically identical, and kapha and progesterone buffer the other two.
mm. I like
So
that. Yeah.
there's hormonal stuff that goes on. And to answer your question, it's more a sense that of these archetypes that I've mentioned, you know, of my hemodoshic archetypes, um, uh, of women who have more vata and pitta, and who are A and AB blood types, are going to be more challenged than O, B, and kapha women. So depending on what they have going on, like my name for a woman who's a kappa and an O, I call them the oak tree. They're very strong. They are not at risk for osteoporosis. There are different health risks of all of the issues that women face, you know, later in life, that the different doshas and blood types are going to have different disease risk profiles relative to those. So to me, to answer your question, I can really design a beautiful program of prevention, understanding exactly the blood type and the doshas and the hormone picture that each woman has, because it is so very, very individual. Does that
Mm.
make sense, or was that just a
Yeah.
whole lot of information to dump on you?
No, 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 that makes complete sense. I'm so invested in this. I'm loving it. Loving this
See,
conversation.
talking Ayurveda is so fun.
Yeah, I just love how it just bringing it all together and people with their own unique methodology. And like this is something we actually teach in the Ayurveda Alchemist program, which is our school where we certify women to become Ayurveda holistic health coaches, is bringing your own wisdom and knowledge from all different paths of life, because as adult learners we have different backgrounds, and for you, for example, it's like bringing in this blood science with Ayurveda, and you've already created like your unique methodology which is so different to any other practitioner out there. And this is what I call like the soul of your business, because it's really your wisdom and your passion all brought into the soul of your business. And yeah, so I'm loving hearing this from you, because it's just, yeah, wonderful when other practitioners do this. So yeah, no,
I was
makes
really pleased when I checked out your podcast because I thought this would be a really good fit for your audience, given the other,
yeah.
material that you cover.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it's not only the blood type and Ayurveda that you've brought in together, but also Ayurvedic astrology. So, in addition to the blood type science, you incorporate this into your practice. So, can you share how Ayurvedic astrology helps guide the health and wellness decisions of your clients as well?
I can, and again, I'm being as authentic as I already am, even though there are sometimes some sacred cows that we may step on a bit. I mentioned earlier that I was very Vata deranged for much of my life.
Mhm.
And when I learned about Ayurveda and learned how to do constitutional assessments with the methodologies that I had been taught, I was considered a Vata Pitta constitution, and that's what I assumed. But I also had a sense harmony, and I am sure that I've worked with the Vedic sciences before. I
Yeah,
mean, the understanding that I have of this, my training is not that deep, honestly. I it's more of
I
an
get
inner
you.
knowing
I definitely
than
get you. That's how I feel.
okay. And I'm really careful not to go beyond my scope of practice, frankly. I don't do clinical work. I do, this kind of consulting stuff. And I felt years ago that when I learned this, I knew it was true, but I also knew that it came from another culture at another time in history, and things had gotten distorted by the time it got to me. And I've just always kind of felt that. Um, and I also had learned, as I'm sure you did, that, way back in ancient India, Ayurvedic doctors and Vedic astrologers worked very closely together because they're Vedic sciences, and Vedic astrology is so much more sophisticated than Western astrology, and it's actually based on a completely different zodiac. So even though the words are the same, Vedic is based on the sidereal zodiac that is actually astronomically correct. So the principle of as above, so below is operating, where Western astrology was fixed a couple of years, 1,000 years ago, because the precession of the equinox, it's
Mhm.
actually not astronomically correct. And in Western, we consider somebody's sign to be their sun sign. So everybody born that month has the same sign. And in Vedic, we use the rising sign that changes every couple of hours. So we really do need to know somebody's exact birth time to develop their chart. But when we have this information, and this is a little spooky, you can actually see the causes of all disease conditions in somebody's Vedic chart.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and the way Dr. David Frawley describes it, he to me is one of the, again, a mentor, that Vedic astrology that doesn't, determine exactly what's going to happen to us, but it shows us what the vibrational tendencies are for our soul that we chose, and it gives us tools, as he describes it, to overcome our karma.
Mm,
So that's one way of dealing with it from a health perspective. But I'll tell you the part that really excites me, that I feel I have the best grasp of. I have always felt that the Ayurveda that I learned does an incredibly good job of working with Vikriti. I think being able to identify doshic imbalances as the different stages of disease is just brilliant. I tingle when I say that, that we have a blueprint for understanding health and disease that most people don't. And that's just amazing. But I never really felt it, again, in the training that I had, at least, that it really had a grasp of Prakriti. I never really felt that those little tests in the books were deep enough. And I remember thinking years ago, how could there be only 3 types? People are so complex. And I came up with my own metaphor relating to the 3 primary colors. So I made Pitta red for fire, and Kapha blue for water, and Vata yellow because it ages us. And we're combinations of colors. And I've been looking for a deeper understanding of that for myself for many years. Okay, so here's the punchline. The other thing that Vedic astrology can show us very specifically is our constitutional type from an astrological perspective. And it shows us the Prakriti exactly. So it turns out I am a Leo rising, and my planetary sign is the sun. I am pure Pitta. The Vata was all Vikriti. It's a secondary sign of mine. It is not my constitution. And I learned this, oh gosh, 8 or 10 years ago here in Florida. I met up with a Vedic astrologer, and we said, let's look at this because maybe we'll find something interesting. And it was mind blowing. We actually wrote a book about this and the rising signs. They are a little bit different from the constitutional types as I was taught them. And again, with more precision and more nuance, and another facet of that prism that I was describing earlier. So it turns out that because I'm a Leo, I'm a Pitta, and Leo is about being a leader. There are things that I found I was able to own. And it took me at least a year to reorient myself as a Pitta rather than a Vata person. And it was life changing in terms of me understanding who I chose to be in this life. So that's my short answer about the astrology. It has a way of addressing Vikriti that's incredibly sophisticated. And I think it gives us tools to really define our Prakriti that I was not satisfied by my earlier Ayurvedic training. And I, even as the expert, had myself misassessed for several decades.
I love that. I did actually have a Vedic astrologist on the podcast a while ago, and I just found it so, so interesting. So I'd had my chart done a couple of times from different Vedic astrologers. And again, it was so eye-opening because I've never really resonated with like the Western astrology. It's not something that really excited me. Everyone's always talking about, what's this? Yeah, yeah. And I kind of was like, like everyone can be lumped into like the predictions of that sign. In Western, I'm a Pisces, and in the Vedic astrology, isn't the more important, or the sign they go off is more the moon sign? Is that correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. It's the rising moon, and the sun is the third.
Yeah.
That we look at.
So it's very different because it represents, like, isn't it like the soul, the mind, and the body, the different aspects of the sun, the moon? And yeah, the planetary alignment, it was so amazing. Yeah, I was like Jupiter, I think Sagittarius was my sign in Vedic astrology. It was,
I'm not surprised.
yeah.
You have that light, and in what I can share with you in the work that my Vedic astrological partner and I did, Sagittarius is a fire sign, but the planet that rules it is Jupiter, and that's a water sign.
Yeah.
So that makes your type a literal dual dosha.
Mm.
not a primary secondary. Yours to me is literally a dual dosha. But again, in the book that we wrote, we also identified what we felt is the sole purpose for each of the signs. So you and I are both fire. The
Mhm.
Leo fire is intended to be a leader. That Sagittarius is intended to be a guiding light.
Mm. Yeah, it's so
And
interesting.
I really do, I do get that about you. And you do exude that kind of light. I'm not surprised by what you shared with me.
I'm loving this. And I just want to say for anyone who is listening and to this episode and not like completely um has all of the understanding of the Ayurvedic terminology. When we're talking about Vikruti, we're talking about your imbalanced state, your current state, so your current dosha. So if you do a quiz online and it comes out that you're more Vata, that's your current imbalanced state. And the Prakruti that we're talking about is the state, your innate state that you're born with, and that's why we're talking about the Vedic astrology being so powerful in determining that. Is that
Thank you. That's such a clear explanation. And I'm sure you're asked all the time if people ask, does your constitution change? And of
yeah.
course, the answer is no, your prakriti, your basic constitution is determined at conception. It never changes. But
Mm,
the state of your doshas currently can
mm.
fluctuate, throughout your life.
Yeah,
Exactly.
100%. And so where can we find this book you're talking about? Because I'm all over it.
Mm, Um, I it has not been published.
Oh no.
Um, so there were some issues, and we were not able to complete that. And I've been sitting on the material for several years. And I recently realized that I need to study the Ayurvedic astrology myself
Mhm.
because I don't feel comfortable, um, bringing anybody else into the project. So over the past few months, I've really taken a dive into this study, and I will be offering something in writing of my own in integrity that I can offer. So I'm afraid I don't have a better answer, but it's exciting to know that that material exists. And of
Yeah.
course, I will include that in my readings and consultations.
Yeah. Well, please let us know when the book does become
Yep,
published
I
because
look forward to staying in touch. Thank you.
I'm so interested in reading it. And where else can our listeners, they're probably like their minds are blown. This is so much information, but so juicy, so good. And they're wanting to learn more. Where can they find you? Where can they learn more about all of this?
Probably the best place is my website, and that's easy. You mentioned Divina Rising is the name of my platform and program, and divinarising.com is my website. And they'll see there the readings and consultations I offer. I have a membership community because, as you introduced a little earlier, my background was in finance.
Mm.
And what I have finally gotten clear about in the last year or two is I've been passionate about wellness for years now. But I live in a world, and you do too, probably, where people's health decisions are usually still made by insurance companies. And I've decided that until we are financially free, we don't have full access to the wellness that would be available to us. So my platform is about really sharing with women the truth
Mm.
about the systems of medicine and finance, and how we can break free of those by really connecting with our inner being. And that's why these tools for understanding our soul purpose, prakriti, through Ayurveda and astrology, as well as blood type, I believe that our souls decided these things before we came here, and these systems and models, especially Ayurveda, are breadcrumbs to remind us of who we are and what we came to do. And I just love that in this lifetime, that's what I get to play with.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I will put your website in the show notes as well. So Anyone
Thank
looking
you.
at those can just click straight over. This has been such an insightful conversation. I absolutely love bringing this type of information to everybody out there, and I have learned so much from you myself. And it's just so, yeah, I'm so happy because I love bringing Ayurveda, science, ancient wisdom, modern world, bridging that gap, and just, yeah, it's really lit me up. So I really appreciate you coming and sharing all of your wisdom with us today.
You are so welcome. I've enjoyed it myself, and I'll just leave you with I am fortunate enough to have a Sanskrit name that I received from my spiritual teacher. And so my Sanskrit name is Rasika,
Ah.
and it means one who enjoys everything. So I really do see that as my spiritual path, frankly, of bringing people together to celebrate this crazy life we have here.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Namaste.
Namaste. It's been a pleasure.